Hey folks, the Saxophone Oracle here. This week I want to talk about how we gauge our development as saxophone players and improvisers. Anyone with common sense knows that we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others, right? People will even spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on therapists or motivational speakers to hear things like, Oracle, don't compare yourself to Jay Metcalf. All that matters is that you're a better Oracle than you were yesterday. Right? But human nature is what it is. There's always going to be some sort of comparison, but we should really be focusing on our own personal development and not looking at others. One thing I've noticed about people trying to learn music is that for whatever reason, when it comes to music, people have this tendency to expect improvement to come very quickly. And I notice this particularly with adult learners. Now, I've addressed this topic at length in some of my other videos, the one called Talent versus Discipline. I have another one about 5 sax myths debunked. But today, what we're going to talk about is the learning process and how I suggest you should go about evaluating your playing and development. In the cold opening of today's video, you heard a short clip of a young 14-year-old saxophone oracle improvising a solo on a B-flat blues. Now, was it terrible? Yeah, it was pretty terrible. But was it terrible for a 14-year-old? No, it was probably pretty good, actually. So let's talk briefly about how that 14-year-old oracle got to that point. I started taking piano lessons when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I did it for a couple of years. And then I picked up the clarinet in 7th grade for the school band. The following year, I started on saxophone, and the recording we heard was the year after that, towards the end of the 9th grade. So when I made that recording, I had about 5 years experience playing music, and 3 of those we'll say were on a wind instrument. How many of you watching have been playing saxophone or your instrument for less than a year, less than 2 years, and you can already play several tunes and blow a solo over a blues? And how many of you out there are telling yourself, oh, I suck. This is too hard. I'm never going to be any good at this. I wish I started when I was a kid. If only this. If. But I imagine most of you watching, especially if you're watching my channel, are much farther along in your development than I was after playing music for 5 years. Or let's say 3 years because of the wind instrument thing. 3 years. That's how long it takes the average kid to be able to do something like that. And sure, I practiced, but I didn't practice any more than what my band teacher told me, and I didn't practice anything other than the material he told me to do as well, right? So if you're still comparing yourself to a kid, well, hopefully you're starting to realize how much farther along you actually are. Now, around that time, about 14 years of age, is when I started to take music very seriously. I started taking one-on-one saxophone lessons. I started practicing 3 to 6 hours a day, and I completely immersed myself in music. And when I mean immerse, I literally immersed myself. I was living, eating, breathing all day long was music, music, music. And that's when I started making dramatic improvements. But again, they didn't happen overnight. In a sense, we need to start thinking about our music making more how we think about our finances. Follow me here. What I'm talking about is compound interest. Okay, we have to forget about short-term gains. If we invest a small amount consistently, then over time, the results we reap are exponential, especially if we're following the Oracle's advice on how to practice and try to kill as many birds as we can with one stone in every practice session. In music, you almost never see immediate results, but over long term, you'll be astounded. You need to assess these things over a larger period of time, like a year or 2. In one of the forums I belong to, an adult learner shared several highlights of their journey playing the saxophone over the course of 1 year. And here's a short list of the things they pointed out. Okay. They said they can play 2 or 3 tunes while reading the sheet music. They said they can now read music as long as there aren't too many notes and the rhythms aren't too complicated. They know how to tune up using an app. They know how to do a bit of improv with the iReal app. They're able to play music in a section with other instruments. And they even played once in public for 10 minutes. I think that's pretty amazing. And I think this person is probably improving at a much faster pace than I did as a beginner. This person also goes on to list what they hope to accomplish in their second year of playing, and I think it's just wonderful. So now, here are 5 tips from the Saxophone Oracle on how to keep things in a healthy perspective while gauging our progress. Number 1, put it in writing. You don't have to write an essay. Point form is fine, but put it down on paper or put it into your computer. What are your short-term, medium-term, long-term goals? So certainly, what are your goals for 1 year, and then maybe 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road? The important thing is that for your short-term goals is that you're as specific as possible and make sure you keep them attainable. So things like, for example, I want to be able to sight read music from the real book, or I'd like to be able to play all major scales in all 12 keys from memory, or I'd like to be able to blow a simple solo over a blues in F, or I'd like to be able to get all the way through my music without squeaking or without stopping. I'd like to be able to hold a note for 20 seconds. I'd like to be able to play once in public, or maybe I'd like to find a group of other beginner musicians that I can perform with, things like that. Number 2, take stock. So after a year of practice and hard work, sit down and actually put pen to paper again and list your accomplishments. Did you meet your goals? Did you not? Where did you fall short? Anything else you might have accomplished or experienced along the way, as this person in the forum did. Okay, and once you're done that, make a list of new goals for the next year. I think you'll find that you've achieved a lot more than you initially set out to or thought that you could. And then you're going to have to readjust for the coming year and possibly readjust your goals for the medium term and the long term. 3, keep a practice journal. Not only does this keep our practice routines organized and on track, but it's another thing that we can look back on to help us put our achievements into perspective. 4, record yourself. You don't need to invest in expensive or fancy equipment. Your computer, the smartphone you have, that will all do the job. It's perfectly fine. But recording ourselves is a great tool that gives us a true picture of what we actually sound like. Now, you're never going to like what you hear on these recordings, but that's okay. It's a great way of measuring your improvement. And you don't have to worry. You don't have to share these recordings or post them anywhere. But over time, over the years, you're going to be really glad that you have these little time capsules of your development. I'm forever grateful that I have lots and lots of recordings of myself from a very young age and as I progress, even though I rarely listen to them. 5, once a year, keep a video diary. This is something we often do with our kids. I do this with my daughter. I'll sit her down and ask her questions. Who's your best friend? What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite book? What do you want to be when you grow up? Things like that. Because as we grow, both as humans and as musicians, our tastes and our goals are going to change. If you asked the 14-year-old saxophone oracle who his favorite saxophone player was, he would have said Kenny G and Clarence Clemens from Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, right? And if you asked him what his musical goal was, he would say the be-all, end-all was to hopefully be as good as his high school saxophone teacher one day, right? But all these things changed, and it's really nice to have a record of this. You'll thank me later. I'm the Saxophone Oracle. When it comes to evaluating our own development, it's a really difficult thing to do. We're so emotionally invested in it, and in our daily practice, we're so hearing everything on a micro level that we don't necessarily take notice of all the organic things that are happening in the background. It's really something that we have to evaluate over longer periods of time. So I hope you take these 5 tips to heart. I hope you found them useful. As always, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. By doing so, it teaches the YouTube and the algorithm that this content exists, and hopefully other people will see it and I'll be able to help them along their saxophone journeys. I wish you a great week. Happy practicing. We'll see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.